Steam Next Fest 2024 has come to an end, ladies and gentlemen, and I wanted to have a video that would highlight my top picks out of all of the demos that I ended up playing. These games are in no particular order and are games that I am genuinely excited for one reason or another that I'll end up going into. Hark the Ghoul. You know it's a good game when I end up making an individual video on it, and Hark the Ghoul is fantastic. Are you a fan of Souls-likes? Then you'll like Hark the Ghoul. Do you like the style of Hollow Knight? You'll like Hark the Ghoul. It basically plays as if it's a PSX first-person like RPG, but the world and the enemies and the way that it's all designed is very, very Souls-like-esque. The one thing that I appreciated about it is it actually gives you movement abilities that play into the environment. Like you can end up extending the height of your jump, and that will allow you to reach certain areas that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. There's also a surprising amount of care thrown towards the physics because you can do Dark Messiah kicks and knock enemies off ledges or kick barrels and items into enemies for chongo damage. As far as I know, their demo is still available and it's got like at least a good 2 or 3 hours worth of content, especially if you go for all of the special items. Scheduled to release next year, I am definitely going to pick this one up. Mandragora, another Souls-like, here we go. So this is a 2D Souls-like that I discovered right as their Kickstarter ended, which sucks because I would have definitely funded this project. Their demo technically came out earlier than Steam Next Fest, but it's still a very, very good demo worth playing. While on the surface level, it just seems very simplistic, what I appreciated is that there are a lot of different mechanics. Hopefully they don't become overwhelming in the full game. And the combat felt meaningful, like enemy position and environment position, as well as hazards, all played into how the combat flowed, which is something that a lot of 2D Souls-likes kind of mess up. Like, how do you make a 2D Souls-like difficult when you can only be attacked by 2 different sides, right? But what they would do is smart enemy placement, where maybe you're fighting a big guy and he's taking up all your attention, but meanwhile there's an archer shooting at you. There's also a fairly impressive skill tree, and the demo only allows you to use one of like 6 characters. I'm really excited to see the other classes. The game is scheduled to release winter this year, as far as I know, if it doesn't get delayed. Metal Bringer is the best roguelike you've never heard of. So these developers ended up making a game called Samurai Bringer that I covered a couple years ago, and they've been steadily cooking and working on their next project, which is Metal Bringer. Summarizing this game is difficult to do because there are hundreds of different mechanics all working together to make the combat flow in such a way that is highly customizable. Basically, you have an action combat system where you can design all of your attack combos, the damage types that you end up doing based on color, all the while leveling up your character by doing certain actions, i.e. jump, you level up your jump height. Dash a lot, you level up your movement speed. It's also a roguelite, which means that there is a form of constant progression. Every time you die, you don't just restart from scratch, you slowly get stronger and stronger. All of this and more was already in Samurai Bringer, but now it's been a lot more refined in Metal Bringer, and on top of that, you have mechs from like Gundam or Armored Core. These mechs can also be completely customized with all of their different joints and parts and stuff. My one negative critique is because it's so in-depth, it can scare away a lot of players that don't understand all of these mechanics. Like, I'm gonna be real, it took me a long time to come to terms with how the mechanics worked in Samurai Bringer, and thankfully I have all of that knowledge to bring into Metal Bringer. This is supposed to be coming out winter of this year, and I cannot wait. But now let's slow things down a little bit for you farm sim folks. Luma Island. First of all, the artistic direction in this game is probably one of my favorites I've ever seen. Like, this looks like Hytale or Minecraft with a resource pack. I love it. I will admit I'm not the biggest fan of this genre, but I did want to include it in today's video for those of you that are into the farming sim games. It has co-op, it also has some dungeons, and what really impressed me was the map design. In the demo, you basically had this gigantic island that you could explore, and it was full of like these little puzzles and items that you would get to upgrade your character. That's not something you typically see in this type of a game. My biggest criticism is just more so a pet peeve of mine. too many crafting tables, too many crafting recipes. You'll craft one thing so that you can get a resource to craft another thing. The game is supposed to be releasing November 20th, 2024. I'm probably not going to cover it because, again, this isn't really my genre, but so help me, I'm kind of on the fence because I did really enjoy what I played. Now here we got another game called Overthrown that I will get even though it's not my favorite genre. This was probably the weirdest game out of Steam Next Fest for me because essentially you have a city builder, right? But you have third-person combat and control over your character. The city building aspect is okay. The movement capabilities in the game are actually god tier. Like, this basically feels like a Mario game with the amount of tech that you can do with your character. It is staggeringly impressive. The game also doesn't take itself too seriously, allowing your character to literally lift buildings and throw them, or lift trees and throw those as well. Near as I can tell, the game will slowly end up leaking into some sort of automation, where you'll have various NPCs taking care of a lot of the busy work that you would be doing early game. The main gimmick is to slowly fortify your town and make it better and better defensively because there's going to end up being enemy raids every few days. This game is scheduled for 2024. Don't know when, but hopefully soon. It does have multiplayer, and again, I'm not the biggest fan of the genre, but the core gameplay mechanics are just so innately fun. I'm gonna pick this game up for sure. The Spirit of the Samurai. Oh boy, this was a game that I saw at like Xbox Showcase or Summer Games Fest or something. And I mean, the artistic direction alone is unquestionable. I was really excited that there was suddenly a demo for it. And unfortunately, the gameplay itself kind of sucks. Like, if I'm gonna be real, the combat is kind of trying to be a 2D Souls-like. But unlike Mandragora, which I mentioned earlier, Spirit of the Samurai suffers from all of the problems that 2D Souls-likes generally suffer from. You can try it for yourself, but generally speaking, it's just slow and clunky combat, and there's a lot of copy and paste enemies. Too many enemies, in fact. The combat tries to be complicated by having you use the right joystick to manipulate which combos you're using on enemies, but the problem is the enemies and the combat are so dirt simple, there's no reason for that level of complexity. It's a shame too, because I feel like the core mechanics of this game are fundamentally what's wrong with it, which means it's not something that they could just easily patch out. And I know that this section seems a little bit negative, so why am I including it? Because just look at this game. It's a work of art. It comes out December 12th. I don't know if I'll pick it up just because of the gameplay. I'll have to see if it's gotten better at full release. For all of you Vampire Survivor fans out there, we had Temtem Swarm. Temtem is basically a Pokemon ripoff, and now this is a Vampire Survive ripoff with the Temtem Pokemon creatures. It's got multiplayer, it's got skill trees for each of the different Pokemon, and as you progress through the game, you'll steadily end up unlocking more Pokemon that have their own elemental strengths and weaknesses and so on. What really impressed me about this game not only is the visual style, but how active it is. Usually in these types of games, you kind of end up falling asleep because a lot of it has just got to do with kiting, and a lot of it's also got to do with you getting so powerful that you can just stand still and win. But what really surprised me with Temtem Swarm was that the bosses have really well televised attacks and are actually really difficult to manage on top of the swarm of enemies. I mean this in a good way, like it actually felt like a challenge. This is supposed to be coming out November 13th of this year, and I'll probably pick it up even if none of my buddies pick it up, just because this game was so innately fun, but I guess ultimately it does depend on the price. This is Secret Agent Wizard, and the closest game that I would relate it to is Goat Simulator. The demo was so much fun. I was laughing so hard with my friends playing this one, but it is kind of a jokey, like mess around in a large environment that has a whole bunch of different things you can interact with type of game. And I'm not saying that I necessarily expect any depth or anything more than that in the full game. I'm just curious to see where it goes. Like, is this going to be level based? Is it just a party mess around game? The crazy thing is that this is made by the developer who made Dusk, and he's making it with his brothers. So I have 100% confidence that whatever this game is going to deliver. It's supposed to be releasing January 2025. So yeah, it depends on the price, depends on the full game's content, but I'll most likely pick this up. Streets of Rogue 2. This was a weird one. So I played the first game, which is incredibly old, and I was really excited for the Streets of Rogue 2 demo that was coming out, but unfortunately the demo is only single player, despite the fact that this game is going to have multiplayer. At first glance, you would think that it's just a top-down, old-school Grand Theft Auto, but the amount of complex mechanics are actually quite staggering. You basically have a random generated world that has its own ecosystem. Like, you basically have a whole bunch of different citizens and they all fall into different factions. So like a punk or gangster would end up being the polar opposite of policeman. You yourself can choose to be a policeman, which means that the gangsters will actively either run from you or attack you, but then you can end up arresting them. Where this game becomes wildly complex and really cool is because that's just 2 of like 50 different factions and roles that the game will randomly assign to these characters in your random generated seed. All the while, it is technically an RPG. You are leveling up your character and getting stronger. It also has my favorite form of saving, wherein you have a character save and a world save separately, meaning that you could join your friend, level up, and then go into your own world and use that same character. Unfortunately, the game does not have a release date. I don't know if I'm 100% gonna buy this one. It's not that the game was bad or anything, it's just after playing it, I wasn't really as excited for it as I thought I would have been. Let's take a break from these maybes and move into a definitive, yes, this game is amazing. Voin, which is like the stupidest title ever. This was a surprise hit for me. I went in with no expectations, but so help me, this dev gets it. So you might not have heard of this game because it was on Epic Launcher, just sitting and dying for years. Witchfire recently released on Steam, and this is a fantastic roguelike, insanely high quality, first-person combat, first-person shooter, in fact, and it's got so many different mechanics and Souls-like stuff going on with it. It's such a good game. Voin is basically Witchfire, but melee-focused combat. And let me tell you, I haven't played a game that had this good melee combat since Dark Messiah. The way the combat ebb and flows, the fact that you can dash around the environment, like you feel powerful and feel like a god with how well you can move your character around. But because of it, it means that the enemies have to be extremely deadly. I wouldn't necessarily say the game is super duper hard because it is a roguelite, which means that you are progressively making your character stronger and stronger and stronger so that you can go out and explore more. What really impressed me is that you're thrown into this giant open world map. The area in the demo was this green grass area, but apparently there's gonna be like a total of 6 different distinct huge open world areas to explore. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a release date, which sucks because I will 100% be getting this game. Speaking of first-person Dark Souls melee combat, Dead Wells. This game purposely tries to look like an old school PSX game, and it delivers in spades the style of the old school video game. It commits to it pretty hard too, with some of the controls and stuff that you end up doing in the environment feeling really, really dated and old. The difference is it's doing that on purpose, and so there is an innate charm to everything. The thing is, I would have already been sold on this game just based on its art direction alone. But the crazy thing is that you've got multiple different classes, all sorts of different weapons, and they're all fully fleshed out. The demo also started out quite linear and then eventually opened up to a much larger area. It's supposed to be coming out in 2025, and as far as I'm concerned, this is a banger and I'm gonna pick it up. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate. What a long title. This game is basically Hades 2 but multiplayer and in the Ninja Turtles universe. You know it's good when me and my homies are playing a demo that ends over and over and over again for many hours. I honestly don't have much else to say on this one other than it's Hades 2. Basically, it's a top-down action beat-em-up roguelike, but the mechanics and the flow of everything just feels so solid. This is also the type of game that you don't typically see having multiplayer, and that was the big appeal for me. It's supposed to be releasing November 6th, which hopefully I'll have time to pick it up because that's gonna be a very busy month for me. We also got this tiny little cute cozy game called Sephiria. It's basically a dungeon crawler that does offer multiplayer, and it's very weird. Combat has depth, but it's also dirt simple. Basically, enemies have armor, and if you can shatter their armor, you can stun lock them into oblivion. The difficulty comes in the fact that enemies are very brutal, and in my opinion, their attacks aren't 100% well televised. That said, this game is adorable and was surprisingly fun to play with friends. I don't know what the full game's gonna cost, hopefully it's like $5 or $10 or something, but I really enjoyed what I played, and unfortunately it doesn't have a release date. Now here we've got the only VR game that I think was worth talking about, called Pixel Dungeon. I'm not gonna say this game is great. I really like the visual style of the game and the fact that it's a dungeon crawler you can play with your friends, and it's also an RPG. But there are a lot of things that I would question about it, namely the controls don't feel very good on the index. You can kind of tell that this game was designed with the quest in mind. Either way, it's as simple as you would think. You go into a random generated dungeon, you can unlock new loot, upgrade things, skill tree, whatever. It doesn't have a release date yet, and if I'm being perfectly honest, the controls weren't the best, which might be excusable in another game, but in VR, that can become a very big problem very quickly. I'll say I'm keeping an eye on this one, even if I don't end up getting it. Now, I want to briefly talk about this one game called Dungeon Done, just because I think that the premise is actually kind of interesting. Basically, adventurers have already gone through a dungeon, and you, the player, and your friends are villagers or thieves that are sneaking into the dungeon after it's been completed to grab as much treasure as possible. It's essentially a PvE Extraction game, but it's kind of neat in the fact that you don't really have a way of defending yourself to the few monsters that are left behind. Again, it's an interesting premise, and that's why I wanted to highlight it. It's supposed to be coming out Q4 of this year. I don't know if I'll get it. Ooh, okay, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I know that we ended up having a bit of a longer video today, but so help me, these were the top picks. There's actually still quite a few other games that I haven't even had the chance to play through yet, but if they're worth mentioning, I'll of course make other videos talking about them. In any case, I'd be curious to know what your Steam Next Fest picks were. The crazy thing is there was hundreds, if not thousands of demos for Steam Next Fest, so there might have been some other gems in there that I missed, but I was browsing pretty diligently, and unfortunately Steam doesn't really recommend games that you're interested in all the time. In any case, if you enjoyed today's video, I would appreciate if you left a like, subscribe for more, hit that notification bell. You guys know how it all goes. There was an absolute ton of games that I didn't end up including just because for one reason or another they were either too weird, not fun enough, or just not worth talking about. Thanks for watching.